I want to introduce Professor Susan Masino, who is the Vernon D. Russa Professor of Applied Science at Trinity College, with a joint appointment to neuroscience and psychology. I put on the agenda, which is posted, some more details about her. Her research focuses on promoting and restoring brain health, and Lord knows we need that, given COVID and the election. Oh my gosh. For nearly 100 years, a metabolic therapy called ketogenic diet has been used to treat seizures, and in recent mechanistic insights, including the role of, I'm going to mispronounce, adenosine, and the traditional implications for brain health and diverse disorders. That's way above my pay grade. But I'm very pleased to have Professor Masino with us, and she is going to talk about forests and brain health and why taking a walk in the woods can be good for the brain. So without further ado, Professor Masino, you're on.
Thank you. Yes. Can everyone hear me? Maybe somebody could wave. Yes. Oh, hello. Everybody waved.
Hello.
Wonderful to be here today. And I really appreciated the overview of the incredible area that you have and the work that you're doing at Cornwall Conservation Trust. So I prepared a presentation today, which is kind of like a smorgasbord. And I want to allow some time for questions because there may be particular things that people are interested in asking questions about. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Oops, hang on. All right, can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Oh, super. Excellent. So this is just kind of giving you the overview. And the one thing that I wanted to add to the introduction is that how I really got more serious about forests and brain health. I've been involved in conservation projects and kind of started doing a course at Trinity called The Green Mind, maybe 15 years ago or so. But I did a specific fellowship at Hartford in 2018 to 2019 on forests and brain health. It was a collaboration with Harvard Medical School. The thing that I wanted to mention is that I'm currently the co-chair of the Science and Technology Working Group, the Governor's Council on Climate Change. So I've been trying to bring to bear all of my different hats to really provide an integrative and innovative view of how we can move forward and keep our communities strong. And I'd like to also acknowledge the work and contributions of Harry White to that working group. So they always say, tell your take-home message at the beginning. So my take-home message is really simple. We need nature for so many reasons. And as one of the themes in the Governor's Council on Climate Change Working Group report, we tried to talk about all the different reasons why we need nature. So I also made a subtitle to my talk, which is Minds and Medicine. So that's going to be the other aspect of my take-home message, is that brain health is about our brain health now, today. It's about protecting it for our future. And forest and brain health is also related to our ability to have the substrates for new medicines. So one of my main kind of underlying motivations behind the community work that I do and my biomedical research and my conservation work is that public policy should support brain health. And I don't think that that is currently kind of a focus of public policy, but if I start from right to left, that is an underlying theme in my work at Trinity College, in my funding at the National Institute It was a focus of my research sabbatical that was a collaboration between Harvard and Harvard Medical School. It's a theme that underlies my relationship with the Grange. So if any of you are Grangers, I love the Grange. I'm the vice president of the Simsbury Grange. And as you know, the Grange is really kind of a, historical organization, very do-it-yourself, self-reliance, community-focused organization. I'm kind of a semi-shepherd faculty positive presence at a community garden in Hartford, next to Trinfo Cafe, which is right across the street from Trinity's campus. I helped to start the Safe Routes to School program in Simsbury, and I was very involved in protecting the Ethel Walker Woods through the organization Keep the Woods, and I'm currently the Hartford County Coordinator for the Old Growth Forest Network. So all of these different things, social relationships, exercise, being outside, self-reliance, self-resilience, community support, and the environment contribute to our brain health. So one of the take-home messages from the Governor's Council on Climate Change is that really our quality of life, our health, our future, and our planet depends on us making good decisions now. And we ascribe to a kind of decision-making perspective that was put forth by MIT by a group called Climate Interactive. And the focus of Climate Interactive, one focus, is multisolving. So multisolving is referring to actions that we can do now that have current benefits, good for the climate. So of course, health is a major goal of public policy and something that can certainly help us now. So if there are things that help our health and also help the climate, maybe that can help people to be more motivated about making the kind of cultural changes that we need to make in order to keep everything going for the long term. In my biomedical research, I started kind of working in dishes with little slices and electrodes and assays and chemicals and things like that. And I've gradually kind of moved up to doing more behavior and systems level approach in brain research. And I really ascribe by the principles of restorative medicine. And that would be the main medical principle of first do no harm. I know that with our neurological disorders, we don't have good treatments, we don't have good medicines on the horizon, and there is a lot that can be done with prevention and lifestyle. And I recognize that these kind of natural processes in complex systems take time. Resilience builds or recovers over time. And that's an important principle to think about when we're talking about complex natural systems. If you haven't, been following this topic like I have, linking forests and health and brain health is a really rapidly advancing research topic. And the National Health Service Forest in the UK actually has a motto that's called Growing Forests for Health. And I like this picture where it shows a young person, an old person, and a person with some type of mobility impairment. And one of the take-home messages that I also want to leave you here with today is that these principles that I'm talking about help everyone. It's good for healthy people, all ages, as well as specific types of disorders. And I'm happy to talk about that more during the Q&A. So when I was at Harvard, I had two goals. One of my goals was to try and do a meta-analysis on forest and brain health. So pull together what is kind of the state of the research, what are the quantified benefits that have been published, and what are the gaps in our knowledge. And the other thing that I wanted to do is try and find out not where the wild things are, but where the wild woods are. So where are these special places that people can count on to help their personal resilience? So they'll be able to know that they'll be there. And these are also places allowing natural selection to occur and allowing the full expression of biodiversity and natural systems. And based on, looking at this puzzle from many different perspectives and from, in the health perspective, the community perspective, the climate perspective, the biodiversity perspective, clean water and other essentials that we need, I know that we need to make sure that we keep a strategic network of nature intact to protect all of those values. And those are really important, specific decisions that we need to be making across our landscape and at the local level. So when I was trying to look at these quantified benefits for brain health, I used a lot of different brain keywords and health-related keywords. Some of them you can see here. So cognition, addiction, anxiety, inflammation, which is a feature of a lot of our neurological disorders. And so is metabolic dysfunction is common in all of our neurological disorders. So there's kind of these common elements of dysfunction that are found. And one of the words that I want to point out that you may have heard, and I don't know if you can see my pointer, but it's epigenetics. So one of the things that is really kind of the holy grail now in treating disorders is not only how can we have medicines that mask the symptoms, but how can we have medicines that may reverse that pathology to actually cure diseases. And one of the main research areas I work in is epilepsy. And a lot of the, well, I guess actually all of the treatments that we have for epilepsy are simply suppressing the seizures. They're not reversing that process. They're not reversing the disease. And the ketogenic diet, which is what I've been working on more recently, and you've probably heard about in the news, but I've been working on it way before it became very popular, is something that we think can actually reverse the pathology of epilepsy. So I wanted to look at, peer-reviewed biomedical research and a number of different factors, and particularly, was there mechanistic evidence for opportunities to prevent or reverse disease? So were there epigenetic evidence or structural changes in the brain or long-term functional changes or long-term changes in behavior? And what I'm going to do now is just go through some of so that's still a work in progress, but what I'd like to share with you some of the evidence that I thought was the most compelling or the most useful and practical that could be translated into policy or into your personal life. So one thing that I was a big headline is why walking is the most underrated form of exercise. So I'm going to kind of start and end my evidence with just encouraging people about the benefits of walking and walking in natural environments. And one of the things that I'd like to share, besides just the general benefits of walking, is that you don't even have to be walking. Just movement through a natural environment has been shown to improve creativity. So this is a study that was done in 2014. And what they did is they compared either sitting or walking indoors with sitting or walking outdoors. So for the sitting position, they had a person just kind of pushed along like in a wheelchair. And what they did is they then did standardized measures of creativity and idea generation. And the take-home message from this study is that you don't even need to be walking outdoors. You could be pushed along in the outdoors, and being outdoors has multiple benefits, including novel ideas, divergent thinking, and an increased number of high quality ideas. So these are all standard scales that are used to evaluate different aspects of creativity. So we all want to be more creative and have, good ideas and be able to collaborate on good ideas. So this would just encourage people that if you do have a mobility impairment, it's still really beneficial to get outside and to get into a natural environment. A very common and increasingly issue is depression. And last year in the annual review of public health, they looked at all of the factors that might be contributing to depression. And what you can see is within the brain itself, there's all these mechanisms that would be, specific biochemical and physiological and genetic mechanisms within the brain that could contribute to depression. And then there's more proximal impacts from the environment on the brain, considering air pollution or noise. And then spreading out from that, there's other factors. It could be family or friends. It could be worrying about disasters or war, climate change, biodiversity, etc. So they wanted to see how much did all of these different things seem to impact the risk for depression. And what they found was pretty interesting. So this is just kind of a list of things that they found that they had some level of confidence about a biological mechanism for. And I highlighted in red the negative things and highlighted in green the positive things. So in terms of negative impacts, air pollution has a very negative impact. It's associated with depression. So air pollution is an issue. And the other issue that's associated with depression is living in an urban environment. So even though there were only 2 studies that looked at these biological mechanisms, the evidence level was considered strong. And there's a lot of epidemiological literature showing the link between increased risk of mental illness and living in an urban environment. On the other hand, being in a natural environment is associated with less of a risk of depression. So I'm going to go into that a little bit more in terms of specific neurological studies that have been done looking at this link between urbanization, living in an urban environment, and mental illness. And here it's expanded. The epidemiological evidence goes beyond depression. It includes anxiety, depression, and more serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia. And what they found when they had subjects that had 90 minutes in an urban environment versus 90 minutes in a natural environment, they did brain imaging and they also did standardized scores of rumination. So rumination is negative self-talk that's often associated with mental illness. And an area that's associated with that is part of the prefrontal cortex. So first, I'll just show you that self-reported rumination, which is that negative self-talk, decreased significantly after a 90-minute walk in a natural setting. So you can see right here, walking in an urban environment, so a 90-minute walk had no impact on rumination if it was an urban setting. It had a significant impact, significantly lowered it if it was in a natural setting. The thing that I thought was most compelling about this paper is that the self-report of rumination matched what they found when they imaged the brains of the subjects that participated in this experiment. So on the left here, you see kind of you may have seen these brain scans with kind of highlighted areas. So this picture here on the top is what you would see with your brain if I kind of cut you down the middle. It's a mid-sagittal section. So that's the very center of your brain that you can see right there. And then this one on the lower part, that would be kind of if I cut you kind of through both ears. So that's called a coronal section. And what you can see is the amount of activity, the change in activity after being in a natural setting showed decreased activation of this area that's associated with rumination. I just put this slide in today based on a very interesting little experiment that my students did, and I just got this data from them. So we've been experimenting this semester in a class that I'm teaching that's called Landscape Planning for Environmental Education and Brain Health. And we have monitors that look at heart rate variability, which is a measure of kind of resilience and resilience to stress that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about. But just when we walked in Hartford through an urban environment and then through the forest that's part of the Park River watershed, what my students found, this is one student's trace, and she had it time-stamped. Her coherence, which is an indication of resilience, so this is good, green is good, went up dramatically in the forest compared to the urban environment. And the students did their own experiments on their own during the week in different types of environments. And when they averaged those together, just in a small set of 5 students, they found that being in a natural environment significantly improved their coherence. And that's important for a number of reasons, because improving this kind of resilience could make you less likely to relapse if you have a problem with addiction. It could be less likely to, you could be less likely to have a panic attack if you're at risk of having panic attacks and similar kind of challenges. Related to that, there's been a number of papers and reports on the importance of nature for veterans and in other at-risk groups such as teens. So this is a report published through the Sierra Club that the rush of wild nature lowers PTSD in veterans and also improves mental health and stress in at-risk teens. So post-traumatic stress disorder is difficult to treat and can be a lifelong condition. And one of the reasons why they think that wild nature is so beneficial is because it promotes awe. And there are more and more papers coming out about the healing power of awe, and even suggesting taking awe walks. So awe is something that you feel in the presence of something larger than yourself. And many people may feel that as a religious experience or a beautiful concert or work of art. But access to nature, healing power of awe, precipitated by nature, is something that can and should be accessible to anyone. And awe promotes more compassion, more altruism, more cooperation, and a decreased, less ego-driven behaviors. So it really promotes the kind of cooperation and compassion that we really need. And in terms of taking action on climate change, recent reports, quantified reports, have found that the qualities of fairness and compassion are the qualities that translate most directly to taking action on climate change and other serious problems. So when the Walter Reed Medical Facility relocated to Bethesda a few years ago, they actually put in specifically a natural environment. And it was called the Green Road Project. And it's something that injured service members and their families can enjoy while they're there at the campus. And they have, and I don't know where it's at now, but they started doing a number of quantified measures, such as biomarkers of stress, natural language analysis, so they could kind of see how these veterans were feeling, and also changes in gene expression, the epigenetics that I was talking about. And Dr. Frederick Foote is a neurologist and a retired from the Navy. And he basically said, you just provide the nature and the mind takes care of the rest. I'm very familiar with a farm in Massachusetts that's dedicated to treating people with mental illness, primarily people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. It's called Gould Farm, and it's in Monterey, Massachusetts. And part of the treatment and the ethos at Gould Farm is to make sure that people have access to nature. So Gould Farm is a working farm. They grow their own food, they have their own woodlot, but they also have these really special areas that they want to be there. They want to make sure that they're there for them while they're at the farm and when they come back to the farm. And in a recent landscape plan for Gould Farm, they already have a bunch of their land is inactive farming or is an active woodlot, but there are some special places that they want to make sure that they protect that have special species, Jefferson salamanders, etc. And the community value of this is that it can provide that connection to place. And I'm really glad that that was included in the introduction, because I think that that's critical. And the kind of connection across generations. I'm really proud of the fact that Simsbury decided to make Belden Forest in Simsbury, Connecticut, the first forest in Connecticut that was entered into the old growth forest network. And I feel like this little forest, it's only 40 acres, right in the middle of town, next to our memorial, next to our library, next to a church. It's right on the bus line, so you can get there on public transportation, is now dedicated to be there for anyone. And this was actually in the original deed for the forest too, donated by 2 women who wanted it to remain in a heavily forested state and be like that. And I haven't been to Cathedral Pines yet, but I'm really looking forward to going. And I know that it's starting to recover from the tragic loss in, I think, 1988. So I hope to be able to visit that soon. One more kind of long-lasting benefit that you can find in the brain is, what if you find changes in brain structure? And I found this study very compelling because it looked at all different types of environments and associating between those environments and changes in brain structure. Because of course, if you can change brain structure, that is a real indication that you might have been able to prevent disease or modify disease or reverse disease. And what this study found is a very positive relationship between living within 1 kilometer of forest and amygdala integrity. So the amygdala is another part of the brain. It communicates with the prefrontal cortex that I talked to you about before. And the amygdala is very important in terms of processing the salience of your world. You know, what is your emotional attachment to it? What's the value of that input that you're getting? And it's often been called the fear center, but it's not just a fear center. It's kind of an assessment center, really. And what they found is that living near a forest, and they discriminated between forests, other green urban areas like parks, other urban areas, that living within 1 kilometer of a forest was associated with better amygdala integrity. So a couple of other points. What about here in the United States in 2020? So we all may know that there's been a huge increase in use of land trust land and state parks and state forests. I've heard estimates of over 300%. I know a lot of places near me would close by 8:30 in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning because they were full. A very recent study, and this is just under review right now, is that feeling strongly nature deprived was worse than losing wages. And this is a complicated graph. I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but what they did is they looked at a flourishing on a standardized scale, a 90-point scale. So flourishing is sort of a measure of, let's just say, well-being. And the bottom line is that feeling strongly nature deprived was worse than losing wages, and only second to entirely losing your job. The last kind of brain health kind of topic that I want to talk about is medicines. So being in the forest, you're exposed to these freely available volatile compounds, and there's some evidence that some of these compounds may have medicinal benefits. And one of the most common is terpenes. So terpenes are found in conifers. They're also found in mint and rosemary. But there's a range of laboratory and forest-based benefits, forest-based evidence for benefits. And those benefits are immunological, so anti-inflammatory. And I already mentioned inflammation is kind of a problem for many reasons. Oncological, so anti-cancer with toxicity specific to cancer cells, which is really what you want in cancer treatment. And also neuronal, so neuroprotection, protecting neurons from harm, and regulating gene expression, the epigenetic benefits that I talked about before. And the thing that's great about terpenes is that they're small, they're fat soluble, and that is those are great characteristics for molecules that you want to cross the blood-brain barrier, because that helps them to get across. And here's just a name of some of the terpenes that are found. So menthol, people have probably heard of menthol, and a couple of other ones, alpha-pinene, beta-pinene, etc. Some other evidence for medicines is last year, maybe a little bit more than a year and a half ago. This is a spooky picture that my staff scientist made for me, and it's about hidden giant viruses. So just as I was starting at Harvard, I heard that they found 16 new species in a teaspoonful of dirt. And as a scientist, I know that there's so much that we haven't discovered yet. And I don't know if you heard, we just found a new salivary gland, literally another part of our body that we didn't know was even there yet. So we're discovering new things all the time. So these 16 new giant viruses dramatically expanded the kind of world of giant viruses that we know about. And in terms of what we can, what the forest has in terms of medical treatments, bacteria and fungi from the forest have already provided 2/3 of current antibiotics. The problem with antibiotics is antibiotics tend to work. Hopefully you're cured of what you have. And drug companies don't want to invest in those kind of medications. They want to invest in medications that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. So it's been a problem that there isn't a lot of private drug company investment into antibiotics. It's gone somewhat into the public realm and even into kind of citizen science. And what I'm really pleased about is the Ethel Walker Woods, which is a forest that I worked on, spent 10 years working on saving that property, which is on top of our aquifer and kind of a keystone property in an open space network. The students at that school, they're all girls, joined a worldwide program to test soil for new antibiotic possibilities. And when I was at Harvard, I met with some chemists and other people to try and do some analysis, like really top-notch, comprehensive analysis of soil samples from older and old growth forests in Massachusetts. So that's still ongoing. In terms of biomedical research, don't even try and read this. I'm just going to tell you what it shows you. Is this shows kind of the evolution of epilepsy therapies. So the ketogenic diet actually started in 1921, which is before this. So it's coming up on its 100th anniversary. The first pharmaceutical for epilepsy was discovered in 1937, phenytoin. And we've put forth a whole zoo of drugs since then, but there's still a very high proportion of people with epilepsy, about 1/3, that are not treated with any drugs that we have or have terrible side effects. In 1975, there was a screening project put forth by the National Institutes of Health to try and develop a screening platform for these new drugs. So you can send molecules in, and they have a whole bunch of tests that they run the molecules through to see if they think they want to put them into clinical trials. So it's a model. They've tested, I think it's even more than this now. I think over 40,000 compounds. They put them into preclinical studies, into animal work. Then they put them into clinical trials, and then hopefully they get into FDA approval. So when I was working at Harvard, my colleague, Steve Schachter, who's an expert in forest botanicals, what he was working on is a compound called Huperzine A. So Huperzine A is an extract from this plant, a club moss, Huperzia serrata. And what he found was that in his initial tests was that this Huperzine extract was very effective at blocking seizures. So here on the left, you can see the seizures were completely blocked by administration of this Huperzine compound. And this was in mice that have genetically determined seizures. And you can see that it was so significantly effective versus a vehicle, so just a control group. And what he found when he sent this compound to the NIH screening protocol, and he sent a whole bunch of compounds that he extracted from forest botanicals, they called him right away And you send them all blind. They have no idea what these compounds are when you send them. They called him right away. And this is just a few years ago, within the past few years. And they said, Steve, what did you send us? This is more effective than any compounds we have ever tested before. So nature has developed solutions to all of these biological problems that we still are unraveling. And one of the most exciting things that Steve said about this Huperzine compound is that he thinks, like the ketogenic diet, it also has the ability to modify disease. So just to wrap up with these points, and then a little tidbit from my students this week, is I just want to share that there are so many co-benefits of forests that we all know about. This is our natural heritage and the natural state of most of New England. We have to keep these little threads intact of our natural heritage. It's a natural landscape that's available to the majority of the population. And I think this is a major equity issue, is to make sure that people have access to these places that can provide them with recreation, quiet, a sense of awe, a connection to the past, and a connection to the future. And of course, all of these health benefits that I talked to you about today. So you may ask, how much nature do you need? Recently, there was a major report that included 20,000 participants. It said that you need about 2 hours a week, but that can be in little chunks. And so it doesn't have to be all at once. Of course, anything is good, but at 2 hours, you kind of got a good amount of benefit. I'd also like to mention why I think Connecticut is so important. We have the largest state level land trust conference in the country, and really strong public support and appreciation for the incredible natural beauty that we have here. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I always thought Massachusetts was better than Connecticut, but I've lived in Connecticut for almost 20 years, and I really love Connecticut. Some interesting kind of things are all coming together right now. So Bushnell Park is the first public park approved by a referendum. The Institute of Living in Hartford is the first hospital of its kind, and it really had a focus on this beautiful grounds and nature. And as you know, I'm a professor at Trinity College, which was long-term the green lung of Hartford, and we're approaching our bicentennial. And all of these things kind of coalesce with the legacy of Frederick Law Olmsted. And his 200th birthday is coming up in 2022. And he had a number of, really prescient quotes about the relationship between nature and our minds. The relationship between nature and our body and our minds. And I'll just read the last one. The influence of the mind over the body gives the effect of refreshing rest and reinvigoration to the whole system. And he found it centered on nature. A final word from my students. As we've been talking about the landscape, been walking around Hartford, some of my students did a little group project. Some did the heart rate variability that I talked to you about. Some of them did a little project just looking at our campus, which they've now called Trinitrees. There was their final project name. And we have some trees on campus that are the top 10 trees in the state of Connecticut, including this elm tree. So our alma mater is called "'Neath the Elms," is the song that's sung every year at graduation. And this elm tree has stood there for every graduation that we've had at the college. And what my students asked me this past week was, why are we celebrating so many things at the college and ignoring these incredible trees? No one really knows anything about them. So we're kind of on a mission right now to get them labeled and get a little bit more information about them and sort of upgrade our campus to be a role model of how to take care of a place the best you can in an urban environment. And I think if we can kind of think about those goals and kind of strategic plans through urban, suburban, and rural areas, that's really our best future for ourselves and our communities and our planet. And with that, I'd really like to thank you so much for the invitation and for your attention. And welcome any kind of follow-up, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Masino, thank you very much. You'll see me as an owl, a barred owl in Housatonic State Forest. He's watching us. But if you have questions for Dr. Masino, we could take about another 8 or 10 minutes. If you could send them in through chat, you'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And then Dr. Masino could answer those. I think we have at least one there. Send your questions in and we'll go for about another 5 to 10 minutes. But that was a great talk, and more thank yous to follow.
Thank you. So I do see that question in the chat. What are the barriers to developing and using these insights about botanical medicine and the specific forest brain health benefits? I think forest and brain health from a really quantified point of view is coming to the fore, and I've been talking to NIH about some possible grant opportunities. I honestly think about this forest brain health issue as what I would call a grandmother issue. You know, it's kind of common sense that we've almost lost, and now we are applying the latest scientific techniques to try and provide quantified evidence for that. In terms of the medical and pharma industry, that's a bigger challenge. You know, a lot of it is related to a lot of compounds I think will probably come from Chinese medicine, because they've had thousands of years of testing different compounds. And I really think we should look to those traditional medicines to see, are there ways that we can develop those further into medicines that we can use now that are more accessible and effective, and find out what they can be used for. So I think it's an emerging field, but you know, the ketogenic diet's been around for 100 years. It's known to be highly effective. But once we started going to the laboratory and making drugs, we kind of lost that. We said, oh, well, we're smarter than that. We can make all these fancy things in the laboratory. Well, it turns out you can take people who none of our medical treatments work, none of them, none of the drugs work, put those completely refractory, untreated people on the ketogenic diet, and half of them will have their seizures reduced by more than half, and 15 to 20% will have their seizures completely stopped. So there's obviously something there that we've been ignoring. And you know, now it's a matter of finding out what that is, and can we provide that so that people don't have to go on a strict diet. Oh, wouldn't any walk? Sorry, I just saw another question. I'm curious how other variables might play in the nature and brain health findings. Wouldn't any walk, even in the city, likely improve brain health? So how do you sort out the impact of individual variables? Right, so I didn't have a chance to go into all of that. I did go into that one study that talked about sitting versus walking. So that kind of controlled for the effects of exercise. And then another study that I presented talked about walking for 90 minutes in an urban environment versus a natural environment. So there have been studies that have kind of tried to tease out those different variables. I actually think that probably the people always say, well, what is it about the forest? And that relates a little bit to the next question, which is, can you talk a little bit about Shinrin-yoku? And I really think that it's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So it's part of it is the complex visual scenery, which can be engaging and relaxing at the same time. There's kind of quantified measures of things like that. Part of it is the probably the reduced noise or different types of noise. Noise itself is a chronic stress that can have harmful effects that have been quantified. Part of it might be the smells, the compounds that I talked about. So I do think that Shinrin-yoku, kind of a way of having a multi-sensory experience in the forest, pulls together all of those values. And Shinrin-yoku is the one, since they've been doing it for a while in Japan, so this is the Japanese name for forest bathing, there is now a published meta-analysis on Shinrin-yoku showing that it has significantly decreases blood pressure. And a decrease in blood pressure is associated with a whole bunch of different health benefits, including decreased risk of stroke, which is obviously a brain health benefit. Yes, so someone just asked about kind of the balance in our ecosystems that like, is there something to treat a problem right next to what caused the problem? So my son was stung and the guide pointed to a plant that immediately neutralized the sting. Is every ecosystem balanced, and a cure for Lyme might be right under our noses? I actually heard something about that recently, and I can't remember it right now. I think it might be related to barberry itself, which is a real irony because there's kind of an association between barberry, white-footed mice, deer, ticks, etc. And I apologize, I can't think about that right now, but many of you may also know that jewelweed is good for poison ivy, for example, and they tend to grow near each other. So that's kind of what I was alluding to, in that, you know, this library of evolution that we have has really solved a lot of these different biological problems. We just haven't figured out how to understand what that solution is yet. And then another question, would not the large parks in a city like New York serve the same purpose in terms of forest bathing? So yes, that is why I think these wild and small pocket forests are critical for people in cities. And now we're finding that they're also critical stepping stones for climate migration, and particularly areas like our riparian corridors in cities and some of these, you know, more natural areas in cities can be critical, you know, kind of hotspots for biodiversity, you know, stopover places, and especially big old trees, which are often found in parks and on these riparian corridors, host many species that aren't found in younger trees or, you know, other park-like settings. Oh, mushroom hunting in Central Park. Yes, I'm a mushroom hunter, so I'm a big fan of mushroom hunting.
All right, well, I think awe is a wonderful way of summarizing your talk. We are in awe, and I must say that if you stand at the end of Coltsfoot Valley and you look into it, you are in awe. And so I thank you very much for what you've presented. It certainly shows the value, the social value of forests that are not readily apparent to those who think about land as being a source of taxes and economic benefit. This is clearly something very valuable. And we'll look forward to staying in touch with you over the years to come and your research. And if we had some way of giving you a standing ovation, we would. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. And the wise old owl will have everyone sign off at this point and get out and take a hike.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Thank you very
everybody.
much, everyone. Bye.
Very good.
Thanks a lot. Great talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.